Hi, I'm Gary Keuffer with the Brown County Beekeeping Association, and today we're going to talk about extracting honey. But prior to getting into the extraction process, why don't we discuss the process by which you're able to remove your supers in order to do the extraction process. And there are several methods by which this can be done. One method is to use basically an escape board type procedure. These come in a variety of different designs, and the way this particular one is set up, it has these small escape type clips that fit in the end, and you might notice that they're oval in shape, and if you have the inner covers that have the oval feature in them, these will adapt to fit in with the nose, and that's how you could utilize it. And the way that it's utilized is the fact that it's somewhat labor intensive from the standpoint that you've got to take your super off, put this down on the bottom, and then go ahead and put the honey super that you wish to extract on the top. Then over a period of several days, the bees will exit through the bottom and vacate this so that when you go to get it, it should be pretty much void of the bees at that point. Like I say, these escape boards come in a variety of different designs. This just happens to be an older one that I happen to have. Another method by which it can be done is basically using the brush method. This is the practice that I followed for a number of years. The fact that you get into the hive, pull out the comb, bees are on it, and very gently brush the bees off. What I have nearby are large containers that have lids. I will readily go over there, put that in there, put the lid on top. So again, it's kind of a labor-intensive process by which to do it, but that's another way to vacate the bees out. More recently, what I've done is to utilize a fume board. And this has been very successful for me this year. Now the fume board has a black metal lid. It has a felt type cloth on the bottom. And the principle is, you want to do this on a nice sunny day. Set this out for a period of time, allow it to heat up because it's important that the metal get warm. And then what you need to do is then apply the particular product that you'll use. This happens to be a Honey Be Gone product. You simply spray the felt area with it, then you apply it on top. It's basically for a period of about 5 to 10 minutes on a nice sunny day. The metal basically takes the liquid, changes it into a gas vapor, and the bees will vacate. You have to kind of experiment with how much you use. Sometimes if you use too much, you'll chase too many bees out, not enough, and you might have to apply some more. In removing this super just yesterday, it was a nice day. I followed the method. Once I took it out, there were no more than probably 8 to 10 bees inside at that juncture, and again, I just simply brushed them off. So that's another method that you could use to vacate it out. Another procedure that you could use is the use of air. And this might be by a compressor, might be by another device. The idea being leaf blower, the fact that you take the hive, you basically stand it on in near the entrance of the hive, which you could do at a safe distance. Blow the bees out at that point. So the procedure that you use depends a lot on how many hives you might have to deal with. A commercial guy, you would want to use a blower or something like that. A board like this, more or less for a hobbyist, takes a protracted period of time in order to do it. But these are several of the methods that you could use to vacate, to get the bees out prior to bringing it back for extraction. Remove the super that we're going to do for the extraction today. But prior to getting into that process, let's talk a little bit about the extractor itself. Now the extractor is basically run in 2 different designs, one of which is largely used for commercial purposes, hobbyists that have quite a few hives, and it operates on a radial extraction principle. And by the radial I mean the frames would go into this cylindrical extractor in this manner here, representing kind of like the spokes of a wheel that would go in. And the idea being is that they go in this fashion, once it's uncapped, to sling the honey out. What's nice about the radial procedure, you're basically one and done once you do on both sides and it spins it out, because you only need to do it one time. That's the radial principle. Now this particular extractor that we'll be using today is called a tangential extractor, meaning basically straight line. And so in this particular extractor, and this is generally typical of most smaller and expensive extractors, it's necessary that you extract one side, then you have to flip it and do the other side. And what they normally recommend is what they call the 50-100-50 procedure, meaning the fact that you run it long enough to basically extract one side, about 50% of it out, you reverse it the other direction. At that point, you extract 100% out of that side, and then reverse it back again to get the remaining 50% out, which basically balances out the weight and the stress of the comb at that point. So like I say, most of the lesser models are the tangential, where you've got to kind of do the flipping around, which is labor intensive, as opposed to the radial where you put it in, it's one and done once it spins out. So those are basically the two types of principles on which the extractors work. Ready to do or begin the extraction process. I've gone ahead and pulled out one of my frames, and as you can see, it's well laden with honey on both sides. And there are several methods by which we could do this particular process. One of which is to utilize a knife. And the knives come in a variety of different designs, shapes, fashions. There's heated knives that allow the removal of the wax. There's knives that are serrated blades that allow for removing as well. There's just a number of different knife features that you can use. The thing that's critical about utilizing the knife is your frame conducive to using a knife? And this is what I learned a long time ago, is that the development of my comb simply did not stick out quite enough to really allow, labor-wise, easily to get that off. So I began to explore other ways of removing the comb without utilizing a knife feature. One of those happens to be the scratching device. And basically what it is that very carefully we are cracking the outside cells of the comb to allow the honey, once we begin the process, to go out. Again, it's somewhat labor intensive. You just kind of work it around. And what's nice about whether it's a high spot or a low spot, it allows you to get in there and get that out. What I've gone to more recently, which is a little bit faster, is the roller method. And this particular roller has sharp points on here. And what it allows you to do is basically, despite the fact that you might have high or low spots, how you can roll this out in different directions, basically uncapping this to then allow for the extraction. Now these different processes, like with the knife method, if you have enough wax that's out and you cut it off, it makes for a lot of large cappings. I myself try to do as little damage, you might say, as possible to the comb. The fact that in cutting that much off, is that much more they have to repair. Cutting that much off means that those cappings have to sit in the tank, drain out, but you are the benefit of getting a lot of wax and doing it by that particular process. The thing about the scratching and the roller method is that you kind of minimize the wax removal. So that's the part about it that I like, the fact that there's not that much more for the bees to repair. But on the other hand, you're not the beneficiary of getting a lot of wax that you might need for crafts or projects like that. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and do one to kind of show what's involved in the process. Basically what we're doing here, you can do this either vertically, you could do it horizontally. I prefer to kind of do it horizontally in this fashion, where I'm going ahead and basically just very carefully scratching the caps off. And like I say, you may have to go in different directions, different times to kind of get what you want. Yes, it's kind of a labor-intensive process, as opposed to a hot knife where you're one and done. But on the other hand, these particular frames do not lend themselves to that because they're pretty much flat with the wood. One of the ways that you can improve the width of that comb is by utilizing spacers. So if you have a penchant for wanting to use the knife, your situations like this where the comb is not out far enough, one of the things that you could do is to utilize these spacers that allow for 9 frame placement within your hive. As we know, normally it's 10. I utilize 10, which makes for the more shallow depth of the frame. Whereas if you use a 9 frame spacer, the bees will actually draw that out a little bit wider to make it more conducive for a knife. So that's another option that you have as far as if you prefer to use a knife down the road. So we're going ahead, like I said, we're scratching one side. We're scratching the other. And another thing to mention about in doing the extraction process, temperature is kind of critical. The fact being is that it's a nice warm day, but not quite hot to the point that I would like it. They say that ideally, an extraction area should be around 85 degrees to get the most flow out of the honey. So even though your working area may not be 85 degrees, if where you've kept your supers, perhaps you could provide some additional heating or something, but if that area could be in and around 85 degrees for a period of time, it would be more conducive for the honey to flow out of the comb. So like I say, the temperature is kind of critical to get the best extraction process done. So we're just using this scraper here. Basically, once we kind of get all the caps done, and there might be the occasion too that once you spin it, you find some areas that you've missed, and you can basically redo it again. So we're ready now at this point, basically put it in the extractor. And as I say, this is one of the tangential extractors that will allow for, you have to do one side and then the other. So this is the process by which it goes in. What's critical too, as you do this, is to make sure that you use frames of equal balance. So we don't want to get this off kilter once we get it going. Now we can go ahead and try one of the other ones. As you can see, it is a messy process. So now let's try a roller. Now the roller on here is that we simply take it, and it's a little bit faster process, by which we can go ahead and roll, basically perforating the caps, spin it out. And like I say, sometimes once you spin it, you realize you missed some. It's just a matter of doing that and then putting it back in again. But I'm a frugal type, and I try to get every little bit out that I can. And sometimes what you do is use a combination where the roller might not work best. You can use a scratcher in lower areas to kind of get it out. So a combination of the both works just fine as well. Now as you can see, we're kind of minimizing the wax removal. And generally what you will find is that these small flakes of wax will be part of the process and go out. Now on the other side we have a bucket along with our strainer. Now these wax will be caught in the strainer, and what I do is that I save those within a bowl, and what I do later when I'm done with the process, I will basically take those small wax little particles, put them on a large cookie sheet or something of this nature, put them out for the bees to basically clean up, and then what's left over is this fine little wax flakes that I could utilize in my wax melter to repurpose again. So here's another one. We're now to the point where we're ready to do the extraction process itself. We've gone ahead by a couple different methods, done the uncapping, so we're about ready to run the extractor. Prior to doing that, just to point out the fact that one of the critical pieces of equipment that you need is a strainer type device. The two-piece, it has a coarse screen here on the top and a more finite screen here at the bottom. And what this will allow is the removal of virtually all the particles, bee parts, wax, everything that we need to do. We have our honey bucket down here, and in this particular case, we're draining it into a honey bucket that already has the honey gate on here. And what the process will be that once the honey goes into this bucket, we will allow it to settle for a couple of days for the debris, which is not really present. The debris I speak of is the foam. The fact that in the process air gets introduced into the honey and it will basically rise to the top. So at the end of your process you might notice a lot of white foam which is at the top of the bucket. That's no more than just air particles for the most part. There's a variety of methods by which you could deal with that. I myself, that's kind of a part of the honey that I keep for myself. But one method that you could get rid of the foam on the top is basically by using like either a spoon, whatever, to slightly remove it, get it off. Or another method is using like saran wrap. The fact that you take the saran wrap, lay it on the top, lightly press it down around the foam. Once it's kind of on the top, grab it in the middle, basically quickly pull it up, and it will remove the vast majority of that foam. So that's one of the tricks. So we got our honey bucket ready. We got our screen on the bottom. And another important thing to do is to be mindful to open your honey gate. The fact that before long, as the process begins, the honey will gather in the bottom of the tank. And if we're not mindful to open the honey gate, the extractor will fill full of honey and restrict the spinning operation. So be mindful of the fact that be sure and open up the gate prior to doing that so there's no restriction on the movement of the cage. So we're about ready to start. So we're going to go ahead and turn it on at this point. Roll this down slowly. Now this should be pretty well balanced. So what we're doing at this point is beginning the process. And what we'll do is kind of do the 50, 100, 50 method. We'll allow this to run, say, for about 3 minutes. We'll stop it, reverse it on the other side, allow that to spin out in total, and then put it back again on the other side. Well, as you can see at this point, we're in the midst of the extraction process. We have honey that is coming out now going through the strainer. And one of the things that oftentimes might occur, that as the extraction process begins, there's a certain degree of unbalance within the extractor. This particular extractor is mounted on a piece of plywood to allow for more stabilization, which also allows for the fact that you could put a weighted feature. We had some unbalancing just a few minutes ago, so we applied a bag of animal feed on here to more or less stabilize it, which could be done as well as cement blocks or something of that nature. The point to consider in doing the extraction process is to kind of evaluate your honey color. I, for one, like to break it down as far as at certain times of the year you might have light, you might have dark. In this particular case, we've got some very light honey. So I kind of call that out in order to keep it of the same variety, the lighter honey as opposed to the darker honey. Another factor to think about is that sometimes in pulling the frames, you may find honey that's not totally capped. And a way to kind of check for that is to make sure that it's of the right viscosity. And what you can do is that you can see the liquid. In this case, this is all capped, but in the case where you might not see it capped, what you can do, take it horizontally, kind of shake it lightly, and if it stays within the cells, it's of the right viscosity to allow you to extract it. If it should run out, it's not ready just yet. You wouldn't want to do it.